You're listening to Real Investor Radio with Fuhr and Jack BeVier, where we cover advanced real estate investing topics to help you stay ahead of the curve in your real estate investing business. Hey, welcome back to Real Investor Radio. I'm Fuhr, joined again by the great Jack BeVier. Jack, it's good to see you.
Good morning, sir. Great to see you.
You're always the great Jack BeVier, Jack.
Yeah,
I have to say it. I have to give you kudos where I can. Man, so Jack, I'm going to jump right in today. I read an interesting report on Redfin. Came out on May the 30th. The headline was Redfin reports price drops hit the highest level in 18 months as high rates dampen buyer demand. So, basically the latest housing market analysis reveals a significant shift that's favoring buyers. As of April 2025, there are approximately 500,000 more home sellers than buyers nationwide. That's a 33% surplus, the largest since Redfin began tracking in 2013. We're seeing price reductions in some markets across the United States. Week ending May 26, 6.4% of home sellers were reducing their asking prices. That's the highest share since November of 2022. The median asking price dropped by about $3,000, not much there. Seeing an inventory surge, active listings are up to 1.96 million houses. That's up 16% year over year. And 44% of those listings have been on the market, Jack, for 60 days or longer. Never a good sign. Just seeing some buyer hesitation, some regional variations. I noticed there was one, they had a pretty extensive table, and they were talking about their home buyer demand index, and that's down 12% year over year. So, I think the 30-year mortgages are hovering around that 6.9 to 7%, Jack. Could it be just interest rates only? Could it be consumer confidence? Could it be, what's your take?
Yeah. So, my perspective is that it's been soft since November. Like, showing activity has been soft since last November. The October bottoming of interest rates, there was a big surge right then. But when things started to head back up, and then Trump took office, and there's been a lot of just uncertainty and in the world, and since then, I think that the combination of those two things have just caused consumer psychology to react in a way that people are just not that excited about making big decisions just at this moment. The ground just doesn't feel settled underneath their feet. Yeah. And then we just happen to be going into the spring. So that was nice timing from a volumes perspective. But I'm nervous about the end of the spring selling season, because if we're in higher in this, and I think we are, higher interest rate environment for a longer period of time, we're not going to get an interest rate driven boost to demand.
Yeah.
And we're talking about privatizing Fannie and Freddie now. So that you'd expect that to have a modest increase, upward pressure on mortgage rates also.
Mm-hmm.
And then my overall look is that I think that we got a consumer recession coming. To kick off the end of the year. So,
whoa, wait a minute. Whoa, hold on here. That's the first I think I've heard Mr. BeVier say
is
that.
It?
I think it might be. Talk about why you feel like that's consumer recession's coming.
Yeah, I feel like there's a shift in the labor market happening right now, that hiring freezes have gone into place at a lot of large companies. And I think that that's going to continue to increase, really resulting from technological advances. I think, it's something that we've been working on. I think that AI has gotten to the point where it actually does real work now. And so companies are looking to get more out of the people that they have with adding technology as a productivity booster. And so the argument to add more headcount right now is just not that compelling. And I think that as the technology gets better, it's going to put pressure on labor to change job descriptions, right? The pie will expand, with new technology. It's ultimately deflationary, which is good for the economy, good for productivity, and in the long run, good for the consumer, right? But in the short run, if you're one of the ones that gets disrupted by it, it doesn't feel so great, And this is going to be pressure on white collar labor, which is not something that we've really seen, not something that we've experienced before, right?
Well, that's something I'm hoping to talk about with our guest today, actually. So So I'm sorry, Jack, but keep going if you weren't
Yeah,
complete with that.
that's the thesis, is that I just think that there's going to be, I don't think that there's going to be tailwinds on the labor market, and I think that's going to hurt psychology. I also think that's going to hurt consumer psychology, and all those things are not going to be good for the housing market, right? That's none of those things encourages people to trade up houses. Certainly not to trade in their cheap ass mortgage. So I don't know. I'm kind of just hunkered down, and we're in this one for a while.
Yeah, let me ask you this while we're on the subject. So, as both a investor who, still buys a lot of houses per year and does a lot of projects per year, and as a nationwide lender, what's your take on some of the markets that we're seeing around the country that we lend in, Jack, where we're, quite frankly, parts of Florida, parts of Arizona, some of the markets in the country that are feeling pretty depressed right now in terms of inventory and slowdown in sales. What's your take as a lender on that? Like, let me just pick one. Fort Lauderdale, tough market right now in some areas.
Yeah, I think that, like you said, a lot of the Florida markets, Texas market, all the Sunshine States, right? Everywhere that benefited significantly from the
Net
run up,
migration.
the post COVID run up, migration, are all softening right now. Also, those places that have where it was easy to get a permit issued, what they did was they issued permits. They issued permits like gangbusters and built on a multifamily supply, which definitionally competes, just because it's housing, with the single family market. And so you've got an excess of supply in places where you can get permits, right? The nice thing about getting permits, the problem with it, the downside to that is that everybody can get a permit and build a lot of houses. So right now, all those places where you can get permits are suffering from a bit of an oversupply right now, a glut of inventory at the moment, in a weaker consumer demand environment where interest rates aren't helping anybody. And then ironically, you go up to Hartford, Connecticut, and it's super tight and prices are increasing in that market. And that, people have been talking about the Northeast for the past 6 years. All of a sudden right now, it's the healthiest housing market in the country. So there is definitely like a regional dynamic to this, and we're having to take that into consideration. Obviously, the listeners are buying wherever they're buying, but for those folks who are in multiple markets, the regional differences do make a pretty significant, there's a pretty significant divergence between submarkets right now. But I'm still very long-term bullish on American real estate, so we continue to buy, frankly, kind of regardless of what's going on a micro. Whatever my 12-month view is kind of like the problem I have to deal with. But I'm not buying at any point in time because I'm trying to time the market. So we just try to keep the machine running, and just the problem or the challenge is what shifts over time.
Right. Well, let's bring in our guest today. We've got what's really, quite frankly, Jack, known as a unicorn on the show today. For those of you who haven't been listening to the podcast very long, we are in Maryland, right outside of DC. I'm in Baltimore today. Jack's in Baltimore. Mike, I assume you're up in Harford County somewhere, or Timonium. Yeah. So I met Mike, Jack, at the Maryland Investor Network, Brenton's thing. We had Brenton on a month or so ago, and I was really captivated by the guy. We sat and talked for probably a better part of a half hour, and he's got quite a story. So Mike I said unicorn because he is actually a conservative who serves in the Maryland House of Delegates since 2020. He's joining us today as a dedicated public servant with a remarkable journey from foster care, where he grew up in Aberdeen, to the halls of the Maryland General Assembly. Mike's a U.S. Marine Corps veteran, hoorah, and Mike served in the military as a military police officer, earning 3 meritorious promotions and multiple awards during his 2 tours, including a deployment in the former Yugoslavia. Transitioning to the public sector, he amassed nearly 2 decades in business development, holding leadership roles across various industries. Today, he works as the head of business development for Albers and Associates, a law firm here in Maryland. And since his appointment in 2020, Delegate Griffith has been a staunch advocate for conservative values, championing education, veterans affairs, and public safety. His legislative efforts have earned him accolades such as the ARC Maryland Legislator of the Year and the CPAC Award for Conservative Excellence. Mike, it's a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you for taking the time, man.
How are you? Thank you very much for having me.
Illustrious career indeed, my friend.
one day at a time. We'll figure it out. We'll see where it all ends up. So,
Well,
thank
man,
you.
there's so
Very nice
much
words.
there's so much I know that Jack and I want to dive into because we love hearing how the sausage is made in Annapolis. But why don't you start off talking about how you made your way to the business development, head of business development for Albers and what you guys do there,
Sure. So
in
it,
addition to Mid-Atlantic Title?
yeah, so it's Albert and Associates in Mid-Atlantic Title. And so it's an interesting story. So, and I do have lots of comments on what Jack was talking about earlier. So I have a lot of
Yeah,
feedback
jump
on
in.
that. So I'll dive into that in a minute. But to answer your question, so, and to try and make it as short as possible. So, I was a foster kid in Aberdeen, kind of joined the Marine Corps to get out of the system and get on my own. Um, Two tours in the Marine Corps, really struggled to get out of the Marine Corps. So I didn't have a lot of confidence in things. I didn't have a fallback either because, you got out of the Marine Corps, you can't go back home. Like, you figure it out. So I did door-to-door sales for 2 years, believe it or not. And frankly, one of the best experiences of my life, very humbling, really taught me how to transition back to the civilian world, because when you're going door to door and trying to get people to do business with you, uh, a lot of pride swallowing, but you learn how to build relationships very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
You learn how to deal with social adversity. You take a lot of no's, 90% failure rate there, but you learn some great skills. Because when you're at somebody's door, you got 5 seconds to get 10. You got 10 to get 30. You got 30 to get 2 minutes, and you got 3 minutes to close.
I got to know, what were you selling?
So I was doing fundraising for the DARE program. So as a MP in the Marine Corps, one of my additional duties, I was a DARE officer for the schools on base at Quantico. So I kind of got out and started doing some work for them, fundraising. So it wasn't like a terrible product, but doesn't matter.
Still asking people for money
At their door,
Right.
right? So, but those skills have transitioned not only in my career, because the core skills and core values are still today, whether I'm dealing with a CEO of a huge commercial company or I'm dealing with a constituent in my backyard. Those skills translate not only to big business, but also to politics as well. And I approach everything from my constituents to my clients to my colleagues in General Assembly with those exact same core skills. And I wouldn't have traded that experience for the world. And then continued to worked for a college for a while. Then, and I don't have a college degree. So I was head of, business development for a college and the Baltimore Sun. Then I was head of business development for, Cal Ripken Jr.'s commercial entities, and helped grow a property management company that was sold, and then got in the title, and I've been just working my way up through that, and then brought on, and we're doing really, really great here with Albers and Associates in Mid-Atlantic Title. So yeah.
Well, that's awesome, man. So you wanted to jump in on some of the comments that we were making with regards to the Redfin article.
Oh yeah. So I have lots of thoughts, and not necessarily to the article, but what we're seeing here in Maryland, right? So from a business perspective, I do business throughout the Mid-Atlantic region, but from a policy perspective, I'm very focused on Maryland. And there are a lot of indicators that I've been alarmed at for a couple of years. So first of all, we're 90,000 units upside down in the state of Maryland. We're 90,000 units short to provide housing for the folks we need here in Maryland, right? So that's an issue, whether it's multifamily, single family, things of that nature. And we've had a lot of challenges in trying to meet that need. The economy in Maryland has been very poor for a very long time. And the number I really want to focus on, there's the number I feel that's the most deceiving number in all of politics and all of economics is unemployment rate. The unemployment rate is tied to, and it's mostly reported by
ADP.
Exactly, ADP in those companies, right? But it's not based upon percent of people working. It's people that are looking for work. And even some of those numbers are driven by individuals receiving unemployment, because if you're receiving unemployment insurance, you're required to apply for 2 jobs a week. So they count in that unemployment number. Even if they're not actively looking for work, they still get gobbled up in that. The number that I think is the most accurate is labor participation rate, or some people call it workforce participation rate. So in 2019 in Maryland, the workforce participation rate was 68%, highest in history. 68% of eligible Marylanders were working. Right now, according to the Comptroller's Office, and I serve in a Ways and Means Committee, so I get the annual briefings on the economic outlook for the state, because we deal with the taxes or revenues, but there are taxes passed in Maryland, goes through my committee, and I of course fight them. But so we have to understand the projections, the outlooks, and the potential shortfalls we're facing, and we are facing in the state of Maryland due to policy decisions. But as of right now, That same workforce participation rate is at 62%, the lowest since 1977. So in a state of 6 million people, what that means is 300,000 Marylanders that can go to work have not gone back to work. Now we can, there's not great data as to why. We can say lifestyle change. We can say people living off debt or benefits or entitlements. But for whatever reason, 300,000 Marylanders have not gone back to work since COVID. All right. Now that obviously has a huge effect on income and revenues and things of that nature. But we've also seen record debt for individuals in Maryland, right? I think the Wall Street Journal reported, or Forbes reported, that the average credit card debt in Maryland is $13,000 per home. So when you're looking at multiple things, people not going back to work, massive credit card debt, combined with the fact that people are also operating, people who bought homes the last few years are operating, at 3.5%, 4% interest rates. If they're not going back to work, their entitlements are starting to go away. The government benefits are going away. They may have been helping support through COVID benefits, things like that. And this isn't a criticism or an indictment against anyone. This is just laying out the facts. And with massive debt, if these folks are in trouble, they're not going to be able to refi, right? Which is why you're going to see foreclosures skyrocket. You're going to see people getting out of their homes, which is why I think, so one of the things I've done in my business, I've really focused on the investor business. Resales are down, refis are dead. So I've spent a lot of time in the investor network, which is one of the reasons we probably haven't spent a lot of time together before this, because this is where business is going, is the investor area. And what I've also seen is, and it appears, and I've talked to some banks and they've kind of confirmed this, where in 2008, they were heavy on foreclosures and they got saddled with all these assets they didn't know what to do with. This time, it seems they're really focused on short sales. I've seen all the short sale folks really go gangbusters right now and have a lot of success because the banks want these assets off their books. And I've seen, with some of the deals that, we've been involved in on title work, that the banks have been extraordinarily not agreeable, but quick to agree to short sales. So that kind of tells me from some, anecdotal evidence and some data in the market where things are going. I think you're going to see, to Jack's point about a small recession, also feels like almost, even though the Fed's supposed to be nonpartisan, almost adversarial relationship between the administration and the Fed, wondering why the Fed has not been reducing rates. Like they were projecting 1.5 points down by this time, right? And we're not. And the banks are also seem to be lagging when they did go down 1/4 point. It was 1/4 or 1/2 point earlier in the year. The banks have been lagging on catching up to what the Fed has been recommending in terms of their interest rates. And then with some decisions made out of DC, does that affect inflation? Inflation goes up, the Fed's going to lag again on reducing interest rates. So there's some environmental factors, there's some policy factors, but there's also some people factors involved in this too. So I don't get caught up when people say it's 4% or 3% unemployment rate. That's just not, in my opinion, that's not a real number in Maryland when you have 300,000 Marylanders who have not, for whatever reason, gone back to work since COVID.
Do you have any idea what the demographic makeup is of that 300,000? Is it sort of, is it black, white? Is it college educated versus non-college educated?
So this data is not, it's not self-reported. It's kind of reported from what the comptroller extracts, that people that are going to work. So it's not based upon demographic. It's just hard numbers. And by the way, it's not impacted by outgrowth. Outgrowth is not impacting this because the net number of Marylanders are roughly the same, about 6 million. And that includes people that have moved to Maryland, people who move out to Maryland. And we can discuss that as well. And there's some other philosophies is philosophy of who's leaving versus who's coming in. That's a greater conversation to have, but we don't know. At least I don't have the data. But the hard numbers are we're down 6%, 300,000 folks who have chosen or unable or whatever you want to say. I'm not going to speculate as to why necessarily without good data. 300,000 Marylanders are 300,000 less Marylanders working now than 5 years ago.
So of all the structural problems that keep you up at night as a delegate, that this is one of them.
Yeah.
What else?
I mean, just our economic outlook in Maryland. We have a huge spending problem. We have a huge taxing problem in Maryland. And people will say
$3.3 billion deficit in 2025.
Well, I mean, so in 2014, our state budget was $35 billion. This year it's 67. That's not a revenue problem. That's a spending problem. And there are lots, and I'm not trying to be partisan about this. I'm certainly a fiscal conservative. And when if your household budget almost doubles in 10 years.
Yeah, it's a 6-7% growth rate.
But your population hasn't, and your economy hasn't, right? That means you're just taking more money out of the economy. Maryland doesn't have a single Fortune 500 company. Think about that for a second. You know what I mean? Quote unquote, one of the wealthiest states in America, because we're overly dependent on government. Government is the largest employer in the state of Maryland.
6% of Maryland's workforce are currently employed by the federal government, either
right, but that's
directly or
yeah, that's direct. Yeah,
that's just federal government, right? Then you also talk about government contractors, but think about state employees. Think about teachers. Think about law enforcement. Think about DPW. You think about all the government employees we have throughout the state, at the state, county, and municipal level, right? Government combined is our largest employer by far.
Go ahead, Jack.
What's your perspective
from government money?
What's your perspective? I mean, as a conservative in Republican in Maryland, what's your perspective on what's happening? For example, I know we didn't get curious about your take on the federal budget also, but just in terms of like Doge efforts and like all of that, like, philosophically, I like that stuff. As a Marylander, I'm like, oh, we could have a regional recession here and the Fed won't care because they'll be like, that's a DC Maryland problem. The overall economy is going fine. And Maryland just gets hung out to dry as we got a lot of people who are on the tee to the federal government in this state, right? Like,
I love that you asked that question because I want to slam the door on that talking point that's out there. All right. And a lot of people have that talking point. First and foremost, we've made ourselves as a state way too dependent on the federal government, almost deliberately, because we've created a business environment that does not grow private industry. If we had robust private industry, we wouldn't even be having this conversation.
That's correct.
And then by contrast, let's look at Virginia. Virginia is equally, if not more, impacted by federal cuts. Have you ever driven down 66 or the Dulles Toll Road? All you see up and down is government contractors.
That's right.
Lobbying firms. That entire region is dependent on DC way more than Montgomery or Prince George's County. And Virginia has a budget surplus and are giving tax cuts this year.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That has same impact, actually more of an impact against Virginia. And they beat us for Google, and they beat us for this company, and they're beating us everywhere, right? It's about business climate. We have put ourselves in a position, we're so dependent on the federal government that something happens like this, it all falls down. And it's always been a bad philosophy because the government can giveth and the government can taketh away, right? And this is why I'm generally conservative, because if we feel government can do good with the right person involved, then we feel government could probably do bad with the right person involved. So the more power and the more we depend on government, the more that rug can be pulled out from us just as quickly. So as far as philosophy, we need to shrink government, period. We need to spend less. We got to get our house in order physically.
We know what we have to do, Mike.
Yeah.
So that's the question when I talk to guys like you, and it is rare indeed, but you go to Annapolis and first of all, I have to think it's a constant uphill battle for you there, but I was reading prior to the show that Maryland ranks 38th in business in climate for business, right?
Now it's 45th. The report came out, 45th.
There you go. So 45th in terms of economic viability and sort of legislative, problems, hurdles that small businesses have to cross. We know that small businesses have left the state. We've deindustrialized since 1980 to now. There's no factories left here. My dad worked at General Motors for 35 years. It's now an Amazon plant. So, tell me what your fellow politicians are really trying to do to make the state a better place for businesses, if anything.
I haven't seen any evidence of trying to make it a better business climate. I've seen, frankly, the contrary. And we fought these issues and efforts left, right, and center. We raised $1.8 billion in taxes and fees this year. There was a bill 3 of the last 5 years that a business-to-business services tax, right?
Yep.
And in my committee, we killed it in 2 years. In 2020, we killed it in 2024. This year it passed. So during the bill hearing, I was the one who asked, you can look on Facebook on Maryland House Republican Caucus Facebook page. I asked the question that opened the can of worms with the head of McCormick. I said, if this passes, what are other states going to do to recruit you? And they admitted that they're going to be moving. They can't move their entire operation because of the infrastructure, but they admitted if that bill passed, they're going to move a lot of their operations out of state. And companies that are more nimble would move out of state, right? They reduced it all the way down to just IT services, a 3% tax on IT services, which impacts everything we're trying to do. The governor comes out and says, we want more IT, more quantum, more AI businesses to thrive in Maryland. But then we're saying on one hand, we want to bring this business in, but then we're going to slap a 3% tax before they even come here. The vice chair of the Economic Matters Committee in the House Delegates, a Democrat, high-ranking Democrat, when this bill passed, moved his business out of Maryland. Jeez. His IT company. He moved his IT company to Virginia.
It's amazing.
A high-ranking Democrat who fought this bill said, even I can't go on board with this, and moved his business out of the state. That's where we're at.
So, I mean, what's your perspective on the next 5 year? What's the 5 year, 10-year outlook on that? Then, is this are we in a declining?
Yeah, are we in a death spiral?
Here?
Right.
I mean,
is the best over? Because hey, if all of a sudden spending is going to get more national attention now, that's not good for Maryland. And if all the elected leaders don't get it, and so we're going to get forced off the teat. And there's nothing to fall back on. I mean, how are we going to get out of how's Maryland going to get out of a deficit spending situation?
I mean, the only way we're going to get out of a deficit based upon what I've seen from the General Assembly is to tax more and find more revenues, because we've put ourselves in a situation where, so it really started with the blueprint for Maryland's future, the Kerwin bill, the education bill, which was a $40 billion unfunded mandate. What's that mean? It's mandated spending by the General Assembly. That's what a mandate is, that the governor must, and it was passed under Hogan, so they're saying you must do this, right? 87% of the state budget is mandated spending.
Is that entitlements or?
I mean, just whatever the General Assembly says, the governor must spend this, right? They put in the law. It's their workaround of the budget. So it's mandated. But they never created a revenue stream to pay for it. So they've been robbing Peter to pay Paul, doing a shell game, and rolling out this platform that the blueprint's paid for. No, it's not paid for. They've been taking money from all these different pots, throwing into a special pot, and saying, the blueprint's paid for, we just got to pay for other things. So, but it's really down to the blueprint. Even the physical analysis by the nonpartisan Department of Legislative Services stated that our financial shortfall is due to the education bill, right? So first of all, it's $40 billion over 10 years out the door that we're trying to find a way to pay for. And then when you combine other policy decisions, and again, this is not, the purpose of this podcast, I'm not trying to get into the policy decision, but we decided to give free healthcare to non-citizens, right? Well, that was a $500 million hit overnight that they wrongfully projected was going to be a much smaller number. And then also our energy policies are a big piece of it, right? So we've, over the last 15, 20 years, eliminated a lot of our in-state energy production, mostly around fossil fuels. So what does that do? Well, that forces us to get energy from other states. So right now, we're buying 40% of our energy in the state from Pennsylvania, and 60% of that energy is fossil fuels. And now we're paying a massive premium. So first, that hurts consumers at the consumer level. But it also hurts government, because government also has energy bills and energy costs. And now those costs have skyrocketed, which gets passed on to the overall budget, and then gets passed on ultimately to consumer again. So when these energy policies are crushing consumers financially, not just in their pocketbook in terms of their energy bills, but in terms of their tax bill too, at the state, county, and municipal level, because they're having to raise taxes and fees to offset the cost of their policy decisions. Marylanders and businesses are getting cut from both ways. And then some of these additional energy policies that are forcing businesses and forcing housing to go to electric power generation, electric devices, electric
heat pump,
all that,
non-propane,
right?
non-natural gas.
So now the policy decision, not only in terms of you must use these products, you must help pay for the government's policy decisions on energy, you must pay for our decision to buy energy from out of state. But then the additional pressure that's put on the state by everyone being forced to use electric devices, right, also now increases energy use and increases cost. So all this is done by policy decisions.
Mike, your district is in the backyard of where most of my friends live. If you grew up in Parkville, Maryland, a little suburb of Baltimore, the natural migratory path for all of them is up 95 into Harford County. And, I know my friends and I know people like my friends. What are you hearing from them, man? Because I have to be honest with you. I'm very blessed to work for a company that allows me to work remote if I want. And frankly, when my daughter graduates high school next year, my wife and I can't get out of the state fast enough. We've already started packing boxes. I mean it sincerely. We're going south. We're going to South Carolina or Florida, someplace that's a little bit more friendly towards business, towards consumers, and, frankly, has a more conservative outlook on things. What are you hearing from guys like me and Jack who live in your district?
Well, first, let me address that last comment. So we tell people in the General Assembly, people come and testify in the General Assembly before our bill hearings and say they're leaving the state. And you talk to the majority party. I'll talk, and not to be partisan here for people that this isn't a partisan conversation, just in Maryland. I'm in the minority party. The party in power is the Democrat Party. They're the decision makers. So I'm just going to refer to it in terms of that, not trying to be partisan. But the Democrats in Maryland will say they do not believe people are going to leave as a result of these policy decisions. They don't believe it. And it's going to take tremendous pain to steer the ship in a different course, to get away from spending. Because remember, when we raise $1.8 billion in taxes, we're extracting that out of the economy, right? And then when we push people out, that's extracting. And one more policy, now you got me on a rant. For example, the bill that I introduce every year. So I was blessed. I was the Maryland Military Coalition Legislator of the Year in 2024. I'm also vice chair of the House Veterans Caucus. I've passed a lot of bills and done a lot of good work and me and my colleagues have done a lot of work for the veterans community and military members.
From both sides of the aisle. Yeah.
In a bipartisan manner, but I've been fortunate to help lead the effort on many of these issues. There's a bill right now. First of all, we do tax veterans' military retirement, which is absurd to me because military veterans, when they're here in the state, you can retire at 38 from the military, right? Which means you got 20, 30 years left to work. And not only are you bringing your military retirement income to the state, but then you're producing another full-time income that's being taxed, but you're spending all your money here. So we should be incentivizing veterans to come to Maryland because you have two incomes you can spend here, right? But the bill I introduced again this year, because right now, there is a deduction. You do get part of your retirement tax, a portion of it's taxed, not the whole thing, until you're 55, your full retirement tax is taxed. So I had a bill for several years again this year that would extend the partial exemption on your military retirement to all ages. That would only cost the state, in terms of hard revenue, $3 million a year. And we couldn't even pass that because they're so worried about the $3 million versus the overall income benefit it'll have the economy. It's maddening. But what everybody's saying the same thing. We can't afford to live here. We're going to leave the state as soon as we can. Listen, I'm going to leave the state as soon as I can, right? But I'm not going to, but I'm going to fight to the death. I mean, not fight to the death. That's probably the wrong word to say, but I'm going to fight with everything in my being for as long as my constituents allow me to have this job to try to steer the ship in the right direction. And it's not about I told you so. It's not about spiking the football. Everything that's happening, we have talked about. We've screamed at the top of our lungs. We told them on the floor, I told them on the floor of the House of Delegates that this would happen if we pass this education bill. And when you get returned, oh, you hate teachers. You don't want to give teachers more money. No, I love teachers. I adore teachers. But if we're going to pay more money, we've got to find a mechanism on how we're going to pay for it as a state. And then you hear the governor and the Democrats say, your budget is your priority. You show your budget, that shows you what your priorities are. All right, well, then let's show Marylanders what the priority is by making hard decisions and actually balancing the budget, not on the back of Marylanders.
I could have sworn that, when O'Malley was governor, that when we brought in the lottery and the casinos, that, all of our schools would be lined in, gold with all the revenues that were supposedly going directly to the schools. Like, all revenues go to the schools. Every school should be made of gold these days, but there appears to be always this structural deficit for schools and education.
Well, that's it. I mean, they talk about we're making hard decisions. It's not a hard decision to take money from other people to pay for what you want. The hard decision is say, what are we actually going to cut? We didn't make cuts in this budget. In your household, if your annual budget goes up year over year, are you making any household budget cuts? No, not as a net effect, right? Right. So our budget last year was 66 billion. It's 67 this year. That's not a cut. We may have spent less increases than we wanted, right? But we're not making any actual cuts. And then you hear the trope that 94% of Marylanders are getting a tax decrease this year. Guess how much that average tax decrease is? $50 per person on their income tax. But when you raise $1.8 billion in taxes, there's no way you can raise $1.8 billion in taxes on a state of 6 million people and not have it significantly impact every single solitary person. So that $50 is gone by the end of January.
Jack, I see you getting a little bit redder. You got to be, something's going on there. What are your thoughts?
No, just I'm wondering, like, what the end game is, right? Like, is there an end game to this, or is it just going to keep getting, they're just going to keep, taking more and taking more and taking more and taking more? And I'm thinking about it from kind of three perspectives, right? Like, one, we have a real estate business that is where the real estate is located in Maryland. I ain't getting rid of state tax on that, right? Like Maryland, if the real estate's located in Maryland, the rents that come out of it and the flipping activity, like that is, Maryland has nexus on that activity. Lending business is like not, that's like a virtual thing, right? Like that could be anywhere. So like, I'm thinking about that. And then as just a resident, right? Like Fred and I pay a lot of taxes. And so, and the conversation about like moving to Florida, moving to, a lower tax state, moving to Texas, it's frankly an annual conversation at this point.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, I don't have kids. His kids are out of the house.
That's true.
So like, when the kids stop being part of the equation, makes it a lot easier. Frankly, it's my nieces and nephews right now, right? Which is what keeps us local.
And the crazy thing is, as a guy, two guys who've lived their entire lives in this once great state, it's just a shame to see. My grandparents were here, my great grandparents were here, came over on the boat, and all of those great value added manufacturing jobs that kept guys, employed, and kids in Catholic schools that lived in the better parts of Baltimore City now and then out into the county, they're gone. And I just don't know how that ever gets replaced. I don't know how you get back to those, high value added blue collar manufacturing jobs that made this state, the great state that it was. I see no indicators that that'll ever come back. And I see, frankly, an entrenched party who has controlled this state for the better part of 50 years, just getting worse. There you go. So, my outlook for Maryland is very similar to a lot of other, Northeastern sort of Rust Belt states that are just dying on the vine right now because those once great jobs are gone. And we talk about, we were talking earlier about AI and how a lot of the white collar jobs will soon be gone that now are the fuel of the taxes for Maryland. I just don't understand how, the politicians, the elected politicians in Annapolis don't see that don't make changes, don't appear to want to make any changes. It's just tax, 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 and spend, spend, spend. And to your point, it is a spending problem. It's not a tax problem. It's absolutely a spending problem, as it is in the federal. How do you go from a $3.8 trillion budget to a $7.4 trillion budget in the government within the matter of just a few years?
Yep. And it's interesting. So during the budget debate, there's a bill called the BRFA, which is a budget reconciliation bill. One of the things they did is they eliminated itemized deductions for individuals or entities making over $200,000 a year. So we try to find the most obvious, no-brainer amendments to offer that no one could oppose, right? But they're so desperate for revenue, they even rejected those. So the amendment I offered on the floor against the bill was to at least carve out or restore itemized deductions for nonprofits. $6.7 billion of donations to nonprofits in the state of Maryland are made by individuals and entities making over $200,000 a year. So we have de-incentivized $6.7 billion of charitable giving in the state of Maryland. And that cuts across every ideology. Everyone, no matter what your race, creed, political affiliation, you have a nonprofit you care about. And some people are still going to give. But if you're a company that has the ability to donate, $1 million in Maryland and get no business benefit, or make that same donation in Virginia and get a deduction, where are you going to make that donation? In Virginia, right? So these are the type of policy decisions we're making that, and every nonprofit in Maryland is freaking out about this, right? It's going to seriously hurt everybody, especially the most vulnerable populations who depend on some of these nonprofits to make it through the day. So,
Mike, I've seen a lot of, mainly at the federal level, a lot of great people that go to DC and they just, they serve in Congress for a term or two, and they're just like, came here to make a change, came here to really see if I could, turn the Titanic, so to speak, and they give up. They either go back to state politics or they just go back to private life. And, how do you tackle that? How do you continue to go to Annapolis every year, try to get stuff done, and beat your head against the wall, not give up?
Well, it kind of goes. I gotta be honest, and not to.
It's not like you're getting paid, some exorbitant amount of money to be a state delegate.
No, I mean, we make some money and we get a little bit benefit, but I have a full-time job that I have to maintain,
right?
To allow myself the terrible habit of being.
Let me ask you this before you answer: what does it cost to get reelected as a state delegate? Like what does it? You're going to run again in what year? 26?
Next year, 26.
Yeah.
26.
So what do you got to raise to get the word out about your candidacy?
It varies by geography. It varies by district. It varies by political party. So it my goal is to raise about 250 grand over a 4-year cycle.
That's not an insignificant amount of money.
It's not.
So all right, so you go to Annapolis, you're beating your head against the wall. Why do you stay?
Well, one, we can talk about this. So first let's talk about how I'm able to operate down there. I think it goes back to my background. You know what I mean? And this is I'm saying it in my head. I know it makes me sound a certain way. I'm just going to tell you my best assessment. I think from growing up in adversity, and in a tough environment, a tough situation, in a rough neighborhood. Aberdeen in the 80s was really tough. My dad was a drug dealer. Stuff I dealt with as a kid. You get a little resilient from there. Time in the Marine Corps. Door-to-door sales, the adversity, just a ton of adversity coming through. None of that adversity compares to what I deal with the General Assembly doesn't compare to any of that. I'm used to getting my teeth kicked in and dealing with these things, and I can take a no. But also my business mentality, I don't take it personally in the General Assembly dealing with issues. I try to keep it on target. I try to keep it on the issues. It's important to me not to lose my voice, so I don't attack people. I don't attack their motives. I focus on the issues. As long as I keep my arguments on the issues, especially how it impacts my constituents, I have a voice and I get amendments on bills and I've killed bills and I get bills passed. So I can still, and I feel I'm pretty effective in spite of the environment, because it isn't the what, it's really the how. And I get bills passed that I was told a Republican would never get passed. I kill things and I amend things that I was told I would never be able to affect. But it's a relationship business like anything else. You know what I mean? Just like in business, the best company doesn't always get everybody's deals, right? It's the relationship. And like I'm sure you and the people you deal with, it's a relationship business, and you'll give somebody the opportunity to fail or succeed based upon the relationship. In General Assembly, there are Republicans who accomplish nothing, and there are Republicans that accomplish great things. There are Democrats that accomplish nothing because they burn bridges and don't have relationships, and they are adversarial in their approach. And then there are Democrats that accomplish everything. So it's really a relationship game. And because I feel like I can be effective, I have been effective. I have certain expectations of what I can and can't do. Like the current bill, I knew I wasn't going to be able to stop that, right? We knew as a party, we couldn't stop that. We did affect some things, but if it's a big, huge priority for them, that's going to happen. But there are lots of ancillary things and even some big things that we are able to get done. And I'm going to be interested in doing this for as long as I feel like I can be effective and have the appetite. And when I lose my patience and lose my temper and feel like it's turning me into a monster, then I'm going to walk away. And hopefully, I can do it on my own terms.
So one of the things that Jack and I have been talking about quite a bit on the show, don't know if you want to weigh in here, but I'll bring it up. We're seeing a lot of legislation around the country that local, state, and federal, where municipalities and states are trying to limit the number, getting back to real estate here, trying to limit the number of houses that entities can own. The feeling is that a lot of these have just sort of died in committee or not even really gotten much play. But some of the proposals that we're seeing, like in Texas, California, a lot of states are saying that, hey, we're going to limit the amount of houses that an entity can own. And Maryland tried to pass, I guess, in the last session, was withdrawn by the sponsor, excess ownership of single-family residences, excise tax, basically ending hedge fund control of Maryland Homes Act of 2025. We have landlord and tenant proposals. Jack could probably speak more about that. I'm sure you're hearing a lot of rumblings around town about those types of laws. What's your take on any of them getting traction? My take is that they just keep taking a bite at the apple until they can get something passed. But we've seen states say, like, hey, you can't own more than 1,000 houses. We've seen states that say you can't own more than 10. 10 is not a Jack and Fred of Dominion Properties. That's like mom and pop who, don't really believe in the stock market. So they want to have a retirement in some houses, some real estate, and rental income. What's your take on what you're hearing and the traction that kind of legislation is getting right now?
Well, it all goes back to the demonization of success, right? And saying that, every landlord is a bad guy and property owners are bad guys. Here's the thing, and this is one of the reasons I support the investor industry so much, right? If it wasn't for investors, how many properties in the state of Maryland would be just in disrepair with no hope?
Half a Baltimore,
right?
Like
It's because of investors, right? Like,
yeah.
And we're 90. There's a lot of people who don't want new homes built. So the only path to get close to our housing needs is by rehabilitation of blighted homes, right? So it's solving a need. And also, these homes come in at a lower price point because they're rehabilitated homes. And if Democrats in Annapolis are at all serious about creating more wealth and more economic mobility, especially for low-income folks in the state of Maryland, they should be embracing investors, because the number one indicator for economic mobility and future wealth is home ownership. And the investors are the only people really creating, homes in some of these areas where we need, economic growth and economic mobility.
I don't see a huge target on the backs of guys who are out there flipping houses, like, doing doing significant value add to a house and bringing it back on the market. What we're more concerned about is the target on landlords, especially landlords who own,
But they don't see a difference, right? Remember, it's in Annapolis, it's all one vertical. It may be different pieces of the pie, and there's a bit of education piece where I'm always telling people, well, this will hurt investors. This will hurt on home ownership. This will hurt the people that are coming in, risking their own money, right? You can't worry about the big hedge fund, right? How many of those are really out there gobbling up properties in Maryland?
None. There's not.
Right.
It's not a
Right.
thing. Yeah.
Right. It's people that, and again, it's not just people like you who own multiple properties that are, landlords and investors. It's the person who, bought a house, and now because of the environment, they can't afford their house anymore and they can't refi. So they get another place and rent their house just to make sure their house doesn't go into foreclosure or bankruptcy. Right. It's those people that are impacted too by these policies we're making or trying to make.
We all know plenty of guys that own 5, 10, 15 houses, and they're
100%.
just, picking up 1 or 2 or 3 a year, and they're building towards a retirement.
Right. And they're not the bad guys.
And if those guys have a target on their back, that's a significant problem. And what we're seeing around the country, including Maryland, frankly, is that those guys have increasingly a target on their back because they, politicians think that somehow or other they're the rich guys.
Well, and that goes back to what's so important about this conversation and what my role is in Annapolis and what, frankly, you and all your viewers' role needs to be in Annapolis and state houses across the country is when this bill comes up, right? Because all they see is, the big dark money person that has a bunch of, rundown slumlord units, yada, yada, yada. That's what, when they hear landlord, that's what they think. That's what they see. But they need to see everybody. When that bill comes up for the bill hearing, there should be 100 investors, 100 landlords in the state of Maryland showing up to testify, saying, this is what we do. This is how we're helping your community. This is how we're helping state. This is how we're helping the economy. Right? And this is why you need to kill this bill.
That's where I wanted to ask you that earlier. What's your take on just the level of involvement that you get from just your constituents? I mean, you're Maryland. Are these people vocal enough about what's going on in Annapolis that truly affects them, or are they not? Is it literally, I don't even know what the average voter participation in Maryland is, frankly, but, what's your take on constituent involvement?
I mean, we always need more constituents to speak up, right? There's a ton of opportunity, but the problem is with the nature of the General Assembly in Maryland being 3 months, people work during the day. People have families. They elect me to be their voice down there to fight the fight so they can go about their lives and for me to do the best job I can. But on the big issues, especially the ones affecting industries, the reason that business-to-business services tax died all but one vertical was because 430 companies signed up to testify in opposition to it, 126 in person. And unfortunately, the one area that was underrepresented was the IT area. That's the place that got hit. Right. Like, okay, this group didn't come out in huge opposition, so we're going to let these guys have it. Right. But that's really it. And I'm happy to share updates with you that you can share with your audience next session when these bills come up, you know what I mean? And send you instructions on how to testify, and you got to flood them. And if it's overwhelming and they feel underwater, that kills bills. It really does. Even in an environment where we're so desperate for revenue, they wouldn't pass the full business-to-business services tax because the outpouring is overwhelming. For example, another example, they slipped in the last second of session a 20-cent fee to view pages on Maryland land records.
Yeah,
I got a wind of this. So I led the effort statewide. I led a letter from my caucus. Again, you can see on, you go to Facebook, Maryland House Republican Caucus. I led a letter because it would have impacted my business to the tune of $15,000 a month.
A month?
A month.
Holy
is how
shit.
that fee would have impacted my title company, right? Not to mention law firm. That's just what it impacted on my title company, right? And we're a mid-sized title company. So, and then, we started pushing that out to the realtors and the Maryland Bar and to all these different groups, and they got bombarded. Well, found out yesterday that they're not moving forward with that fee.
Really?
That fee is dead.
That's great.
Dead.
Put your credit
Right?
card away, Jack.
That's
It
great.
is dead, thank God. But that's because, and people say, well, Republicans aren't effective in Maryland. Well, we started that fire. Now, the Republicans didn't kill it, but we started the conversation. They got all the advocacy groups involved and rained down hell upon the governor's office.
That's
and
great.
Killed that fee.
That's great.
Right? So that's how we're effective as a super minority. But that's what advocacy means. That's when groups come out. So when these bills come out, I'm going to urge you to come out and testify against these bills. And if these bills pass and you guys didn't show up, shame on you.
Hey, Mike, I got this.
I need air support.
There's this I counted this in like city politics, that there's this perception that you can punish the landlord, right? Like that you can, like that, even that concept, right? Like, so whatever your politics are, if you're like, hey, the rich guy should pay more, so let's go tax that business model, or like the attempt to extract value, extract money from that perception. Which, by the way, like, let's not even debate that. Let's just have that. Let's just say that that's what's good for society for a second, right? As a starting point, which I don't agree with, but hey, let's just start there. The mechanisms that are used that are attempted, to me, are like painfully and, like, I don't know, cynically, hilariously futile, right? Like the idea that you can, putting a higher tax rate on non-owner occupied properties, or that you're going to increase the fees to do stuff, or registration fees, all the logistical things that the hoops that they make us jump through.
Yeah,
rent control is a big one.
Yeah, or elongating the foreclosure, or the eviction time frames, adding more due process to the eviction process, like
water rights.
Yeah, which like, on their very, on the checkers level of like on the checkers view of the world, I'm like, yeah, I get how you came up with that, right? Like, but the world's not one dimensional like checkers. There are secondary and tertiary effects to everything that happens. And so, like, I think it's something like 7% of the houses in Maryland, in the state of Maryland, are owned non-owner occupied, owned by investors. And so, like, the attempt to extract money from that 7% just leads, what I do as an investor, right, is I say, oh, okay, like, it sucks that the goalposts moved, right? So everything that I own is now worth less because you've made it harder to operate in this environment. So, like, yeah, you move the goalposts on me, and that sucks. But that negatively affects my value, right? The value of my property, but it affects 93% of everybody else's properties too, right? Like, operating real estate is a business model, right? It's an operational model. And so, like, if you increase the cost of operating, whether that's by a fee or by a logistical, hoop that I got to jump through, I just price it in, right? Like, I have to then price it in because I'm just an operator here, right?
Unless they put in a rent control, right? Which now squeezes you from both ends, right?
Yeah, and that would be and exactly, and that would be a huge taking, right? That, like, rent control would be a huge taking of value from property owners. But it's not just taking a property of value from property owners of the landlords. It's like when mom passes away with a house that hasn't been updated since 1920, and the kids go to sell that house, they ain't selling that to another homeowner. They're only selling that to investors. And so the wealth has been extracted from that family unit, right? Like, it's a destruction of wealth. It's a wealth destruction for 93% of property owners. They're trying to reach in my 7% pocket, and they take out of 100% of pockets with that.
Well, I mean, it's funny. You were going back in terms of the tertiary effects, but you didn't go back far enough. We got to talk about the policy decisions that created the blight, that created neighborhoods that are underserved, that moved the jobs out, that devalued the communities. You know what I mean? Look what happened in Sparrows Point when Bethlehem Steel went. The economy dropped, and those houses lost value because there were no jobs there and people couldn't afford to live there. Those were policy decisions, right, that led to that. So you got to go even further back to the extraction of wealth in families. It all starts with the government decisions, right, that led to businesses leaving, that led to communities becoming poorer, that led to loss of So people will not be able to afford the houses, which led to blight. So the reason that 7% of homes in Maryland are owned by investors goes back to investors wouldn't buy those homes if they didn't get them at a premium. And they were at a premium because of policy decisions to devalue those homes ultimately, when you go all the way back. So, and then they've created the mess. Investors are coming in trying to save the day. And sure, they're trying to make money too. You're not doing it for, you're not a nonprofit. You have to make money too. And you also have overhead, right? When some of these laws we've created that allow somebody to destroy the house with little to no repercussions, or a squatter comes in and destroys the house, and then you have to pay to rehab and bring that building back up to code and make it a livable house. That's also factored into your margin, right? That's not being considered by government, right?
To Jack's point, I think it's the 93% that suffer when a company like Jack, and there's many of them in Maryland, but when they go in and they're like, "Hey, I got a house here that hasn't been updated since 1940, and I'm going to pay less for it now because of all the regulations that are on me and the goalposts moving," and so that not only affects me and the price that I'm going to pay for this house, but it also affects the guy right next door. It's going to affect him too, because his house hasn't been updated since 1940.
Well, this is exactly it. And to push back on Jack's point a little bit, with all due respect, I think
he said all due respect, Jack.
With all due respect, one of the reasons that I've pivoted and focused so hard with my title company and my law firm on investor business is that we're not building new homes in Maryland. We have a huge housing crisis. The only path to restoring Maryland and our housing market is with investors. That's it. And I see the investor business in Maryland being the one area of real estate that's going to absolutely explode.
The thing is, like, but this is a job. Like, everyone, like, there's this perception that we're like a bunch of rich guys like deploying capital. I'm like, dude, I just fucking work for a living. Like, I just find some shitty house and then I go through a bunch of, it's a manufacturing process, right? Like,
if you own 10 homes, you might be making 80 grand a year in your pocket.
I don't think it's that.
If you own them free and clear.
Yeah, right.
Well,
I'm 25 years later, yeah.
But whatever, I'm just saying.
Yeah. I'm
just
just
own a bunch of real estate and not be like some guy driving a Ferrari.
Yeah.
Right? This isn't like I own 10 homes and I'm, I have a yacht. No. You're making a living.
And you know what's funny?
Owning these properties. There's future revenue down the road. There's gold at the end of the rainbow, right? But the day to day, you're not making a lot of money.
Yeah, the rainbow's 20 years long.
Right.
Like, the misperception is that the rainbow is like 5 years long. It's 20 years long.
Right. That's exactly right. And
that's a lot. That's a lot of banging your head up against the wall trying to figure the business out of being a landlord. There's a lot of operational activity going on there to figure it out. And Jack and I have talked many times, Mike, on the podcast about how if you buy, let's say you own 5 houses, it's a 10-year business before you really see any appreciable effect on your work. It's, in terms of appreciation, hopefully you're getting some rent increases over the time and cash flow. But man, you're really banging your head up against the wall to keep that tenant happy, keep them in there. And, just so happens Jack and Fred have been doing it a long time. But yeah, it's not a glamorous business to be a landlord. And I just don't understand where, the politicians in Annapolis think it is.
And people think residential landlords is a white collar job. It's a blue collar job.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Especially when you started out, how many times were you the guy doing the rehab? You guys repairing the drywall. You're in there managing the rehab and the work. Oh, by the way, you're taking all the risk, by the way. And risk, especially when you're first starting out, if something goes sideways, you're in trouble, in real trouble. So we need to be, as a state, supporting these efforts. The only way Baltimore is going to make its way back, especially in some of these communities that are really troubled, and create more homes and livable homes and nice homes and the pride of living in a good quality home, is really through these investor networks and these investors, the ones boots on the ground, rolling their sleeves up. And we've passed a law last year that I supported that created a non-continuous TIF, which is actually really great for these exact things. So a TIF is a type of tax incentive for property for rehab, right? But we passed a law, which I love, for a non-continuous TIF. So a TIF, all the properties need to be connected. A non-continuous TIF allows you to go into a neighborhood and say, I want this house, this house, this house, and this house, and then combine that into one tax credit and one application for that tax credit for the purpose of rehabilitation. So I think that's something we did do to help support this effort. But no, I mean,
Jack, are you familiar with that?
Yeah. And then the states, I'm not sure if it's using TIF money. I should know the answer to this, but I don't. But there's like the $50 million, there's $50 million of state money that's being allocated right now in Baltimore, the Baltimore Vacants something initiative.
That's a little bit different. I mean, there's money being allocated, but this is a tax credit. So Baltimore City a couple of years ago passed a non-continuous TIF at the city level, but there were some questions.
They haven't raised it, though. They haven't gone to market with that bond offering, though.
Okay. Well, there was some question as to whether or not it was legal, whether the Baltimore City Charter authorized it. So what we did, we passed it at the state level to give the mayor support. And then now
authorizing resolution or authorizing legislation.
Correct. So now the counties and municipalities have to enable that. With Baltimore City already enabling it, now that should be fully ready to go. So, and if we can circle around after, I can get some more information on that. But yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea. I'm a big fan of it. I mean, the concept is, hey, we've got these vacant properties that are, if you have a vacant property, it's got a $3,000 assessment. Maryland combined tax rates 2.38%. You know what that tax revenue is? $72 a year. So but if there was a house on it, it'd be taxed on the improvements, and the assessed value would be $200,000 a year. So let's try to figure out the gap financing or what subsidy may be necessary. Subsidy, I'll use that term very loosely, but let's figure out what needs to happen in order to spur the market to turn $72 a year of tax revenue into $720 a year of tax revenue, and then use that $650 as a revenue stream to finance whatever is necessary to turn 72 into 720.
And again, to all your points, Jack and Craig, and my frustration in the General Assembly, we got to tell this story in Annapolis, because not only now do you have a property that's making more tax revenue, it's also raised the value of the properties around them. So now we're making more tax revenues on all those properties. Now there's somebody living in the home who is spending money and they're being taxed in the community. Oh, and if the social issue is your most important concern, we just found a family home, right? And you've given more civic pride, more community pride, because you have less blight in that community. So.
And the costs of the negative externalities as it relates to vacants are very well documented as to how this is just a cash suck from governments. So you're going to see a bunch of ancillary benefits in the budget from lower budgets to deal with all these vacants and all the social ills that happen around vacants.
100% right. Yep.
Mike,
that's one of the reasons I champion this industry.
We spent about an hour and plus with you here. Can't tell you how much we appreciate the time. And I know for those who are listening outside of the state of the Maryland, this must have seemed, highly local, but I can assure you that the things that we're discussing on the podcast today that are frankly Maryland based are happening all over the country. We've got the same issues in very, very similar communities. You could go right up the East Coast, Jack. Philadelphia looks like Baltimore North, Boston, Chicago. Any post-industrial city is going to have the same exact policy issues that Mike has been fighting since 2020 in the Maryland House of Delegates. Any last thoughts there, Mr. BeVier?
Mike, really appreciate the time and appreciate the service that you're doing and the work that you're doing. So thank you very much.
Yeah, man, it's been awesome to have you on the show, Mike. You can come back anytime you want if something comes across your radar that listeners need to know about. Really enjoyed meeting you at the Maryland Investor Network. Continued great work, what you're doing over there with the title company and Albers and Associates. If folks want to reach out to you, they're local investors. If anybody wants to find you, investors or not, how can they get in touch?
Sure. So M. Griffith at rossalbers.com. It is the best way to get a hold of me via email. And
continue giving them hell down there in Annapolis, sir. You need more just like you down there. I don't know how we're going to get there, but we need so many more just like you.
Well,
continue doing it.
I'm very grateful for the time and the opportunity to speak to so many folks. And just so, your folks know, people are fighting for you guys, and we're not going to quit. So.
All right, man. Well, that's the show for today. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Real Investor Radio with Craig Fuhr and Jack BeVier. We'll see you on the next one.